Welcome, whiskey enthusiasts. This is Brett. I'm with you today with my look-alike shirt on. People, every time I wear this, say I look like my shirt. And I've got a limited edition that has recently been released to review for you today. This is Knob Creek Cask Strength Rye Whiskey. This is 119.6 proof, which is 59.8% ABV. I've not tasted this yet. I just opened it up a little while ago prior to this review. And I've actually not heard anybody else's notes on it yet. So I'm completely blind here. I don't know what to expect. I do like the bourbons from Knob Creek, especially the 120. I find them wonderfully spicy. And so I have high hopes for this. I believe I paid about $62 for this. And the average seems to be about $65. So let's get right to it and see how this turns out. The first thing I notice about the nose is that it is very balanced. I've got not a strong spice, but a very pleasant spice alongside a little bit of floral. And neither one of them is taking over. I get a really nice cinnamon and clove, alongside just a little bit of a pine needle note, and some more flowery florals like a heather or rose petal. There's a little bit of the rye breadiness underneath the spice and floral. That's a note that I really like in a rye. I don't always get it, especially the more floral ones. But this one has that, like the scent of a fresh baked rye bread, especially a dark rye. There's a little bit of vanilla underneath from the cask. And some light oak. But mostly what you're going to notice is that there is a lot of spice and pleasant floral. One thing I have noticed, you might have, if you're paying attention, noticed that I've had my nose fairly far into this, and I'm not getting any blast of ethanol from it. At this proof, I was a little bit concerned that it was going to be tough on the nose and it was going to have a little burn to it. So far, there's nothing. So I'm happy about that. It means it's fairly refined. All right, on the palate, what you initially get is, I can best describe it as spicy caramel. If you had melted caramel and you added some baking spices to it like cinnamon and clove, this is what I would imagine that would be like. There's also a vanilla in there, The influence from the cask comes in a lot more in the palate than it does in the nose. So you start out with the nice spice. There's still initially not a burn. You don't get slapped in the face even on the first sip with a real strong alcohol burn. After the initial taste, you'll get a little bit of that pine resin note, but it's a lot more faint in the palate than it was in the nose. The vanilla, spice, and caramel greatly take hold in the palate. Later in the palate, that pine resin note changes a little bit licoricey, if that's a word. You get a slight anise note in there. It also, in the late stages of the palate, turns sort of leathery. Some people don't comprehend that note when I talk about it, but if you've ever been around a stable at all, if you've ever been around horses, you know there's that old leather odor and almost taste, because they're connected, that you get around horses and around their harness leather and the saddles, and especially if it's well used and it's oiled. And that's what I'm talking about. There's definitely a drying effect with that leather note as you head out of the palate and into the finish. And on the initial swallow, you're finally going to get a hit of that burn. Now that I've taken 3 or 4 or 5 sips of it, I'm also noticing in the finish a lingering tingle on the front and sides of my tongue as the high proof begins to show itself a little more. I'm a little surprised that that didn't happen initially, but for whatever reason it doesn't. The lingering notes on the palate, which is medium to long, it's not extremely long, but it's medium to long, possibly due to the proof. You're going to get that leather and the spice mostly, and some oakiness. I don't notice very much of the florals carrying over into the finish. You're still getting a little bit of the vanilla. One thing I'd like to note is some people get a lot of dill in certain rye whiskeys. And it's split whether people like that or whether they don't. I don't really get that in this whiskey at all. There is a little bit of that pine resin note or evergreen note that some people get. Again, that's something that some people like and some people don't. As far as style of rye, this is closer to an E.H. Taylor rye that is heavy on spice, more so than it is to something like a High West double rye that's quite floral, and that takes the forefront. So although there is a little floral note, I still say that it's heavy on the spice. My taste buds also see it as way more vanilla caramel centric than what a lot of ryes are. For that reason, I would say probably, I don't know, but I would judge that this is probably a lower rye mash bill, probably somewhere between a 51 and 60% rye. I would not expect this to be a 95% rye like you get from say High West Rye or from Bullet Rye. I like this one. It's comfortable to drink. It's not going to beat you over the head with anything unbalanced. I think overall it's a good purchase. Whether or not it's worth $65, that's very subjective. I think probably for people that are fans of rye, this is a bargain at $65. For the casual drinker, I don't know. But it is cheaper than EHT rye, which is a similar rye. So for a really spicy rye, you know, it's nice. And I think it's probably worth it. I would say that this is, it's not as good a buy as Pikesville. Pikesville in its price range at about $40 to $50 is a real good buy on rye. This is probably comparable in quality to Pikesville, although it has slightly different flavors, and it's very subjective which one you're going to like. The reason this is $65 instead of $45 or $50 basically comes down to the fact that it's a limited edition and that it's cask strength. So if those things mean something to you and you really want to try that and you really want some cask strength rye, go for it. I think at the opportunity to try this in a bar, you must try it. If you go to a bar and they have this and it's anywhere reasonable in price for a pour of it, absolutely try it, because it's somewhat different than a lot of the ryes that are out there, and it's worth experiencing at least once. Whether or not you actually want to buy a bottle, it kind of depends on your judgment of the things I just went over. My personal scoring of this on our true 0 to 100 scale, where 50 is an average okay whiskey, I'm going to put this at about an 82, which is an excellent whiskey. 80 to 90 is an excellent whiskey. And as far as a well-crafted rye goes, I think this is an excellent whiskey. It gains a lot from the cask strength, and it's not going to show you any flavors that you haven't had before, but it's going to show them to you in a really well-balanced, full-flavored way. And for that reason, I give it an 82. I hope that's informative, and regardless of whether you want to try this one or something different, go out there and find a whiskey you'll love.